To understand the tragedy of the German infantryman, we must start not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power in Berlin. Since the era of Frederick the Great, German military doctrine was built around a singular, rigid concept: the perfect shot. To the Prussian High Command, war was an art form of precision. They believed the bolt action Kar 98K was the pinnacle of human engineering, a rifle for a disciplined marksman who calculated the trajectory of every single bullet. The German leadership believed that a soldier's value was measured by his ability to remain calm and take one life with one round. They viewed semi-automatic fire as a sign of desperation, a coward's crutch for soldiers who couldn't hit their targets. This obsession with precision was a hangover from the 1800s. The German officer class was steeped in the tradition of the Jaeger or elite hunter. To them, the battlefield was a place of controlled, surgical strikes. They looked down upon the mass-fire tactics used by other nations, believing that a superior race of soldiers did not need to fill the air with lead. They only needed to place one bullet correctly. This philosophy was embedded in their training manuals, their drill, and their very identity. They failed to realize that the machine age was about to make the surgical strike obsolete in the face of raw, industrial volume. The Kar 98K itself was a masterpiece of 19th-century bolt-action design. Its Mauser action was strong, reliable, and incredibly accurate. It was also slow. It forced the soldier to move his hand away from the trigger, rotate a steel bolt, pull it back, push it forward, and lock it down for every single shot. In the minds of the Berlin elite, this pause was a feature, not a bug. It ensured the soldier took his time. It prevented waste. They were so focused on the cost of a single bullet that they ignored the cost of a lost second in a life or death firefight. In secret reports from the late 1930s, the German Waffenamt, the Army Ordnance Department, dismissed the American M1 Garand as nothing more than a mechanical toy. They sat in their heated offices, drinking cognac, and laughed at the idea of a semi-automatic rifle. They believed the American character was fundamentally too weak and undisciplined to handle the responsibility of rapid fire. They argued that an American soldier, given a semi-automatic weapon, would simply spray and pray until his ammunition was gone, leaving him helpless. This cultural arrogance blinded them to the reality of modern combat, where volume of fire often outweighed individual precision. The German leaders predicted that John Garand's gas port system would inevitably jam in the mud and grit of a real European winter. They were so blinded by their own tradition of the single-shot hero that they ignored the industrial storm gathering across the Atlantic. They had spent decades perfecting the past, while a Canadian-American engineer was busy inventing the future. They didn't realize that war was no longer an art. It was becoming an industry. While German factories were still hand-fitting bolts into rifles with the care of a watchmaker, American assembly lines were preparing to churn out weapons by the millions. But on December 16, 1944, the arrogance of Berlin finally met the frozen reality of the Ardennes. Imagine you are a veteran of the Wehrmacht's 12th Volksgrenadier Division. You have survived the Eastern Front. You have seen the worst of humanity. You are crouching in a frozen foxhole during the opening hours of the Battle of the Bulge. You clutch your Kar 98K, convinced that your training and your precision rifle are superior to anything the soft Americans have. You've been told the Americans are mere Coca-Cola soldiers who would fold under the pressure of a real German winter offensive. You wait for the order to charge, listening to the heavy silence of the Ardennes, believing your bolt-action rifle is the finest tool ever put in a soldier's hands. Suddenly, the air around you isn't just cold, it's made of lead. The silence is shattered by a rhythmic, mechanical roar. Bang, 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 bang. The sounds are unlike anything you've heard from a standard rifle squad. It sounds like a dozen machine guns, but it's coming from individual men. The trees around your foxhole begin to disintegrate as heavy .30 caliber rounds punch through solid oak as if it were paper. You realize that the weak Americans are returning fire with a speed you cannot match. Your training taught you to fire, cycle the bolt, and aim again. But before you can even find your target after the first shot, 3 more American rounds are already impacting the dirt in front of your face. Before you can even cycle the bolt of your rifle to fire a second shot, 8 rounds of heavy .30-06 caliber ammunition have already shredded your cover. In the time it takes you to move your hand to your bolt handle, a single American paratrooper from the 101st Airborne has already emptied his entire clip. You realize that you aren't fighting individuals, you are fighting a wall of lead. The tactical advantage you thought you had has vanished in a heartbeat. The American soldier doesn't have to pause. He doesn't have to break his aim. He is a one-man suppression machine, and he is closing the distance while you are still struggling to chamber your next round. And then, you hear it, the metallic, haunting ring of steel hitting stone. Ping! Your training tells you he is empty. You have been taught that a soldier is most vulnerable during a reload. You have a 3-second window while he fumbles with a fresh clip. You rise from the mud to strike, your heart pounding with the hope of survival. You prepare to fire your precision shot, finally taking advantage of the American's mechanical toy. But as you clear the edge of your foxhole, you realize the ping wasn't a signal of safety, it was a death sentence. The American wasn't alone. As you rose, his squad mates, who had been suppressing you, didn't stop firing. They operated as a seamless unit of semi-automatic fire. While one man reloaded, 3 others kept their sights trained on your position. The propaganda of German invincibility dies in the slush of the forest floor. You realize too late that the Americans aren't soft. They are equipped with a mechanical fury that Berlin never prepared you for. You are an 18th century soldier fighting a 20th century factory, and the factory is winning. The M1 Garand was not just a gun. It was a masterpiece of industrial violence. To understand why it terrified the Germans, you have to look at the mechanics of the storm. Unlike your German rifle, which required you to physically break your aim, move your hand, and cycle a bolt for every shot, the Garand used the very power of the explosion to load the next one. As the bullet traveled down the barrel, high-pressure gas was bled into a cylinder below the muzzle. This gas slammed the operating rod backward with immense force, unlocking the bolt, ejecting the spent brass, and stripping a fresh round from the 8-round in-block clip in a fraction of a second. The American soldier's eye never had to leave his sights. He could maintain a perfect cheek weld on the wooden stock, keeping his sights trained directly on your helmet while firing 8 rounds in under 4 seconds. This was the birth of fire superiority at the squad level. In the ruins of Italian villages or the dense hedgerows of Normandy, the Kar 98K was a 19th century relic fighting a 20th century monster. The German soldier had to work for every shot. The American soldier only had to aim. This discrepancy in firepower meant that a single American squad could often outgun a German platoon, forcing the Wehrmacht to rely more and more on their MG-42 machine guns just to stay in the fight. The true horror of the Garand is found in the personal, rain-soaked diaries recovered from the pockets of fallen Wehrmacht soldiers. These were men who had survived the frozen hell of Stalingrad and the scorching heat of North Africa. Yet they wrote about the American self-loader with a unique kind of dread. One corporal wrote, "The Americans do not fight like men. They fight like a factory. When we fire one shot, they respond with a wall of lead that does not cease. We are afraid to even lift our helmets, for the moment we do, 3 bullets find us before we can even see who is shooting." Then, there was the ping, the focus of a brutal, improvised psychological war. The Americans were fast learners. They realized the Germans were listening for that metallic ring. So, they turned the Garand's only weakness into its greatest trap. They began to carry empty brass clips in their pockets. They would hurl them against rocks or their own helmets to mimic the sound of an empty rifle, drawing German soldiers out of cover into a waiting ambush of a second, loaded Garand. You could no longer trust your ears. This uncertainty caused hesitation, and in a firefight, hesitation is fatal. Beyond the terror on the ground, there was the crushing weight of the industrial hammer. While the German leaders in Berlin struggled with shortages of oil and steel, the American arsenal of democracy was operating at a scale the world had never seen. Over 5.4 million M1 Garands were produced. For every one rifle a German gunsmith hand-finished, the United States produced 20. The Garand was the physical manifestation of a nation that had industrialized victory itself. It was the weapon that proved that logistics and manufacturing were the true kings of modern warfare. The Garand was rugged. It worked in the salt spray of the Pacific, the mud of France, and the snow of the Ardennes. It became the reliable companion of the American soldier, a weapon that worked as hard as they did. Today, the M1 Garand is a prized collector's item, but for the men of the Wehrmacht, it remains the ultimate symbol of their empire's collapse. General George S. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. For the German soldier, it was the mechanical hand of fate that pulled the curtain down on their world.